But workers are not stupid. People understand what efficiency usually means in corporate America. It means fewer workers doing more labor under tighter surveillance for the benefit of shareholders. And we're already seeing signs of that future emerging. Reuters reported this week that younger workers are increasingly hostile toward AI as layoffs spread across the tech sector and executives openly celebrate replacing labor with automation. That fear is not irrational, it's based on observable reality. Welcome to the Labor Force Podcast, where we talk about the rise in labor militancy and the fact that capitalism is a rotten deal. I'm your host, Mike Strukin, proud member of New York State United Teachers. Well, economic pain continues undeniably, with Trump's approval predictably hitting the skids. Multiple polls place his job approval in the mid-30s, the lowest of his second term, with disapproval reaching historic highs on the economy and health care.
Well, tonight, President Trump's war in Iran and rising costs fueled by it are impacting how Americans feel about the economy and his presidency. Trump's approval now at the lowest level of his second term. Only 27% of Americans approve of how he is handling inflation, and 76% now say they're concerned about their personal finances. CBS's Olivia Rinaldi is at the White House with more on our poll and the latest in politics. Olivia, good evening.
Good evening, Jerika. That new poll also found that 69% of Americans say they don't have a clear understanding of the situation in the Strait of Hormuz, as the war is adding to economic concerns here at home.
President Trump visited his Virginia golf club shortly after issuing a new warning to Tehran. The administration's focus on Iran has Americans feeling the pinch. In new CBS News polling, almost 60% of Americans described gas prices in May as a financial hardship. Last week, the president dismissed affordability concerns.
I don't think about Americans' financial situation. I think about one thing. We cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon.
The president doubled down in an interview with Fox in Beijing.
That's right. That's a perfect statement. I'd make it again. When you tell somebody you're going to have to pay a little more, not that much more, a little more for gasoline for a very short period of time, because we want to stop the threat of being blown to pieces by a lunatic. Everybody says that's fine.
President Trump ran on an economic revival, yet nearly two-thirds of the country say his policies are making the economy worse in the short term.
And we had Amazon executive chair Jeff Bezos on Wednesday accusing politicians of villainizing the ultra-wealthy and using tax policy as a political wedge issue to distract from bigger challenges facing the country.
These people sometimes say that I don't pay taxes. That's not true. I pay billions of dollars in taxes, and it's a perfect. Again, if people want me to pay more billions, right, then let's have that debate. But don't pretend, that that's going to solve the problem. You could double the taxes I pay, and it's not going to help that teacher in Queens. I promise you.
New York Mayor Zoran Mamdani later responded to Bezos' assessment, quote, "I know a few teachers in Queens who would beg to differ," he wrote on social media. Bezos said that while income inequality is a legitimate concern, raising taxes on the rich is not one of the ways to remedy it.
I think what's going on is that it's kind of a tale of two economies. So you have a bunch of people in this country who are doing really well, but you also have a bunch of people in this country who are struggling to pay rent, groceries. And so what's happening here is politicians are using the kind of age-old technique. So there's this tale of two economies, and they're using this age-old technique of, picking a villain and pointing fingers. But the problem is that doesn't solve anything. So people talk about making the tax system more progressive. How about we start by having the nurse in Queens not pay taxes? Why is somebody at all? Why is a nurse in Queens who makes $75,000 a year paying more than $1,000 a month in taxes?
It was unclear precisely which taxes Bezos was referring to, according to NBC News. Of course, despite what this gazillionaire says, taxing the rich is broadly popular. An April poll conducted by Fox News, of all things, found that what bothers people most about federal income taxes is the wealthy are not paying enough. In March, the state of Washington approved a millionaire's tax. Other states have zeroed in on additional taxes for millionaires and billionaires, too. Massachusetts, Maryland, and Maine have all passed dedicated high-income taxes in recent years. In January, the governor of Rhode Island endorsed the idea of a millionaire's tax. And lawmakers in Connecticut, Illinois, Colorado, California have also proposed similar ideas, according to Bloomberg. But on the federal level, tax hikes are unlikely as long as Republicans control the House, Senate, and the White House. Back on the ground, there's a phrase you hear a lot from politicians and economists whenever working people start talking about how hard things feel right now. The fundamentals are strong. But more and more Americans are looking around at grocery prices, gas prices, rent, medical bills, debt, and job insecurity, and asking a pretty simple question. Strong for fucking who? A new CBS poll found that Americans are reported growing levels of stress and uncertainty about the economy, with declining feelings of financial security and growing frustration over the cost of living. Large numbers of people say gas prices are weighing on them. Many feel economic opportunities are getting worse compared to previous generations, and anxiety over AI replacing jobs continues to rise. And honestly, this disconnect between official narratives and lived experience is becoming one of the defining political tensions of this era. Workers are told inflation is cooling, while they're still paying dramatically more for necessities than they were just a few years ago. They're told unemployment is low, while many are juggling multiple jobs, gig work, or unstable schedules just to stay afloat. They're told the economy is booming, while they increasingly feel locked out of homeownership, retirement security, or even the remote possibility of getting ahead. Now add another warning on top of that. Financial markets themselves are starting to flash anxiety signals. CNN and multiple financial outlets are reporting growing alarm in the bond market, as investors increasingly fear that inflation is not going away anytime soon. Treasury yields have surged to their highest levels since before the 2008 financial crisis, with a 30-year Treasury briefly topping 5.2%. Analysts point to rising energy prices, geopolitical instability, and fears that the Federal Reserve may keep interest rates elevated even longer. And here's why that matters for ordinary people. When bond yields rise, borrowing becomes more expensive across the entire economy. Mortgage rates go up, car loans go up, credit card interest rises, businesses cut hiring, local governments face higher borrowing costs. The bond market might sound abstract, but workers feel it materially in monthly payments and shrinking economic opportunity. At the same time, economic forecasters cited by CNBC continue warning inflation could climb higher towards 6% in the second quarter, driven largely by rising energy costs and broader instability tied to conflict in the Middle East. Reuters reports economists increasingly expect the Federal Reserve to keep rates higher for longer as inflation pressures persist. And here's the thing people understand intuitively, even if cable news panels don't. When energy prices spike, everything else follows. Transportation costs go up, food prices go up, utilities go up, manufacturing costs go up. It becomes a tax on daily life for ordinary people. That's why the growing conflict with Iran matters economically even to workers thousands of miles away from the Middle East. Multiple reports now point to rising oil prices tied to instability around the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical shipping routes. Oil has climbed sharply again, and gas prices are already surging. Meanwhile, many mainstream financial outlets have shifted into full recession-proof your life mode. CNN recently published advice on how Americans should prepare for a possible downturn. Build emergency savings, reduce debt, update resumes, strengthen professional networks, and prepare for layoffs. Other financial advisors are offering similar guidance. And think about what that says politically. We live in the wealthiest society in human history, yet millions of people are being told to prepare individually for economic disaster because the system itself offers so little security. Workers are expected to recession-proof themselves, while corporations continue stock buybacks. Wall Street speculates on inflation, and defense contractors and oil companies cash in during the global instability. And notice how this always works. Working people are told there's never enough money for universal health care, affordable child care, public housing, or stronger labor protections. But somehow there's always enough money for military escalation, corporate subsidies, and trade wars that raise prices for everyone else. Because in this system, workers absorb the shock. Corporations pass costs along. Investors speculate. Defense contractors cash in. Oil companies post record profits. and ordinary people are left standing in the grocery aisle wondering why every trip costs more than the last one. That's why so many Americans increasingly reject the idea that the economy is healthy simply because stock indexes are high or GDP numbers look respectable on paper. Economic reality is experienced materially. It's experienced at the gas pump, in the rent payment, in the hospital bill, and whether you can afford a week off work without financial disaster. And when poll after poll shows rising pessimism, rising stress, and declining faith in the future, maybe the problem isn't that workers are misunderstanding the economy. Maybe they understand it perfectly well. Of course, there's another layer to all of this that deserves attention, because when economic pressure keeps building while political institutions appear either indifferent or openly captured by wealthy interests, anger doesn't just disappear, it accumulates. A recent opinion piece in The Hill argued that the political class is dangerously underestimating the level of rage building among working people across the country. And honestly, whether you agree with every part of that argument or not, you can see the underlying reality everywhere. Deep exhaustion, alienation, and a growing sense that nobody in power is listening. Because people can tolerate hardship when they believe sacrifice is temporary or shared fairly. What they cannot tolerate indefinitely is watching billionaires accumulate unimaginable wealth while they themselves fall further behind despite working harder than ever. That's the contradiction sitting at the center of this moment. Workers are told inflation is unavoidable, austerity is necessary, layoffs are efficient, and war spending is patriotic. But at the exact same time, corporate profits remain enormous, executive compensation keeps exploding, and financial markets continue rewarding the very institutions driving insecurity in the first place. And history shows that when democratic institutions stop offering meaningful avenues for economic relief, people begin searching for other ways to express anger. Sometimes constructive, through labor organizing and mass movements, and sometimes destructive, through social unrest and political extremism. You can already see flashes of that frustration online. Discussions across working class forums increasingly frame this current economy not as a temporary downturn, but as a system fundamentally organized against ordinary people. Then, as you may have seen, you have this.
And we have new developments this morning in this massive warehouse fire that started yesterday in Ontario. It's a story Today in LA has been on top of since it started. And now new video has surfaced, apparently posted by the man accused of arson. NBC4's Lauren Coronado has been on this since the fire started. So, Lauren, the video is disturbing with what we see, but also what we hear.
Lynette, absolutely. The video, it's really shocking. You'll see it in just a little bit, but you talk about this massive warehouse fire, right? That happened Tuesday overnight. Well, right now, there are still items inside of the building on fire. You can see those active flames. If you live in the area, you'll see a lot of smoke still hovering right over the warehouse. Now, let's get to that video. Ontario police say they're using as part of the investigation.
You know, if you're not going to pay us enough to live or afford to live, at least pay us enough not to do this. Here goes your inventory.
Shocking video posted to social media showing someone lighting pallets and pallets of paper products. We're talking toilet paper, wipes, paper towels on fire within the Kimberly-Clark warehouse here in Ontario overnight Tuesday. Our team spoke with a worker who says he was with the man in the video just about 10 minutes right before that fire started.
Look, I just met him that night, and from talking to him with the 2 hours I was working with him, I didn't see this coming at all. Because, if he had the, ability to snap that, do all that stuff, this makes me think, what else he could have done.
A scary thought. Ontario police officers say 29-year-old Shamil Abdul Karim, a third-party employee, is facing several arson-related felony charges and is currently being held without bail. Back out here live as you continue to see this building smoldering. It is possible that the accused arsonist could be in court for his first court appearance today, within the next few hours, in fact. Of course, we're going to work to confirm that with the DA's office, and I'll bring you another update closer to 6:55. Reporting live in Ontario, I'm Lauren Coronado for Today in LA.
As the piece explains, not since Luigi Mangione allegedly shot an insurance company executive in New York City has there been such a crystallizing moment for the expression of the growing hopelessness and anger felt by people at the bottom of the economic ladder. Wealth disparities, the lack of upward mobility, the affordability crisis, and the impact of AI are all contributing to these feelings. While the lionizing of Mangione has subsidized since 2024, the frustration that led him to murder the head of United Healthcare has not. Recall the message he painted on the bullets he used: delay, deny, depose. Those words channeled the feelings of millions of Americans who have been mistreated by insurance companies. What the Los Angeles arsonist said, and the fact that he posted a video of what he did, suggests that he too saw himself in a role similar to Mangione's. The LA arson should be a wake-up call to political leaders that they urgently need to address the growing despair felt by many Americans. Some, like New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani, seem to have gotten the message. But at the national level, unfortunately, all signs are pointing in the opposite direction. So that doesn't mean collapse is inevitable, but it does mean the political establishment should stop treating rising pessimism as some kind of messaging problem. This isn't just about consumer confidence. It's about millions of people increasingly believing the social contract itself has been broken. And if wages stagnate while prices spike again this summer, driven by tariffs, energy shocks, and geopolitical conflict, that anger is only going to deepen. Because people can survive hardship. What they struggle to survive is humiliation, working constantly while feeling disposable, indebted, and ignored. Unions, worker organizations, tenant groups, and collective action are some of the only remaining democratic mechanisms ordinary people have to exert pressure before despair mutates into something darker. The alternative is a society where frustration keeps festering with no organized outlet except resentment, scapegoating, and social fragmentation. So when pollsters report rising stress and economists warn of renewed inflation, the story isn't just economic, it's political and social. And increasingly, it's about legitimacy itself, whether working people still believe this system can deliver a dignified life in exchange for their labor. Meanwhile, imagine graduating into these wretched economic conditions. An Al Jazeera report describes a bleak employment landscape facing recent U.S. college graduates as economic instability, AI, tariffs, war, and government funding cuts combine to shrink opportunities for entry-level workers. The article explains that many graduates are leaving school only to encounter a precarious job market marked by hiring freezes, layoffs, and intensified competition for stable work. Industries that once aggressively recruited new graduates, particularly tech, media, and government-funded sectors, have slowed hiring dramatically as employers respond cautiously to economic uncertainty and rising costs. The report highlights how AI has become both a source of anxiety and a practical barrier for new entrants into the workforce. Companies are increasingly automating junior-level tasks, while also expecting applicants to already possess advanced technical and AI-related skills. As one graduate quoted in the article describes, students were promised that college would provide stability, only to discover there are fewer opportunities than we expected. Many young workers are now competing against experienced applicants for positions once reserved for recent graduates, while automated hiring systems and mass online applications make the process feel impersonal and discouraging. The article also notes that broader economic pressures are worsening the crisis. Tariffs, inflation concerns, geopolitical conflicts, and cuts to public sector funding have made employers reluctant to expand payrolls. Some graduates interviewed expressed fears they may have to postpone milestones such as moving out, repaying loans, or beginning careers in their chosen fields. Analysts cited in the report describe a labor market that appears stable statistically, but feels stagnant for young workers trying to gain a foothold. Not to mention being a tech worker right now. For years, the tech industry sold itself as the future. Lavish campuses, six-figure salaries, free food, stock options, and the promise that if you learn to code, you'd never have to worry about economic insecurity again. Tech workers weren't just employees, they were presented as the new elite of American capitalism. But now, the mask is slipping. One employee at Meta described the current atmosphere inside the company as a horror, talking about coworkers crying in the shower and taking mental health leave as layoffs and AI restructuring sweep across the workforce. And this isn't happening in isolation. Meta is reportedly cutting around 10% of its workforce while reorganizing everything around AI systems and AI native teams. Thousands of employees are being shuffled into new AI divisions, while management layers are being wiped out in the name of efficiency. At Amazon, workers are describing an environment dominated by layoffs, surveillance, return-to-office mandates, and constant anxiety over automation. Employers told reporters that attendance tracking has become rigid and invasive, while AI is increasingly integrated into their daily work under the implicit threat that if they don't adapt fast enough, they'll be replaced. Some workers said remote employees and middle managers were especially vulnerable during layoffs. Others described a workplace culture where people are pushed into performance plans while flexibility and work-life balance disappear. And maybe the most revealing part of all this is the language now being used about tech workers themselves. A recent piece from Futurism argued that workers once treated like aristocracy in the digital economy are now being discarded like human waste as the AI boom accelerates. More than 100,000 tech jobs have reportedly disappeared already this year, and the industry that once promised limitless opportunity is increasingly looking like every other sector under capitalism, ruthless, unstable, and disposable the moment profitability demands it. That's the thing about capitalism. No matter how prestigious your profession feels, no matter how many perks you get, workers remain workers. The same system that once handed out stock grants and kombucha taps can turn around overnight and decide your labor is redundant because an algorithm is cheaper or because shareholders want another quarter of growth. And what's happening in tech right now matters far beyond Silicon Valley because these companies are shaping the future of work everywhere else. The culture of constant surveillance, AI-driven productivity management, shrinking management, and permanent insecurity. That's not staying confined to tech campuses. That's the model corporate America wants for all labor. And workers are noticing. Even younger workers who grew up hearing that AI would create endless opportunities are increasingly skeptical. Surveys now show rising anger and distrust toward the technology industry, especially among graduates entering one of the worst white-collar job markets in years. The contradiction is becoming impossible to ignore. Companies keep telling workers AI will augment them, while simultaneously laying people off, intensifying monitoring, and demanding more output with fewer humans. This is why, again, labor organization matters, even maybe especially in industries that once thought they were immune from exploitation. Because eventually every workplace built entirely around shareholder value reaches the same conclusion. Labor is a cost to eliminate. And when workers don't have collective power, they're left facing billion-dollar corporations alone, hoping the next restructuring email doesn't arrive at 4 a.m. tomorrow morning. That said, one of the most revealing things happening in the AI economy right now is that even the people building these systems are increasingly sounding the alarm. According to a recent report highlighted in the Deccan Herald, workers at Google DeepMind in the UK have moved to unionize, driven in part by fears over how AI technology is being deployed, including concerns about military applications and the broader social consequences of the systems they're helping create. What stands out here is that these are not anti-technology outsiders. They're elite tech workers, engineers, researchers, and developers embedded inside one of the most powerful AI institutions on Earth. And even they are looking around and saying, this trajectory is dangerous. Workers need a voice, and corporate leadership simply cannot be trusted to regulate itself. That completely destroys the fantasy we keep hearing from Silicon Valley billionaires, that resistance to AI is just irrational panic from people who don't understand innovation. The workers closest to the tech understand it perfectly well, and many of them are terrified by the incentives driving it. They see executives racing toward automation, surveillance, military contracts, and mass labor disruption because Wall Street rewards speed and monopoly power, not social stability. And that's exactly the argument labor journalist Stephen Greenhouse makes in a recent Guardian column, warning that billionaires are trying to lull us into an AI complacency. Greenhouse points out that figures like Elon Musk, Sam Altman, and Peter Thiel are aggressively selling the public on a future where AI supposedly creates abundance for everyone, while downplaying the possibility of mass unemployment, widening inequality, and the destruction of worker bargaining power. The message coming from these billionaires is essentially, trust us. Trust the same class of people that spend decades outsourcing jobs, crushing unions, driving wage stagnation, and consolidating wealth upward at historic levels. But workers are not stupid. People understand what efficiency usually means in corporate America. It means fewer workers doing more labor under tighter surveillance for the benefit of shareholders. And we're already seeing signs of that future emerging. Reuters reported this week that younger workers are increasingly hostile toward AI as layoffs spread across the tech sector and executives openly celebrate replacing labor with automation. That fear is not irrational, it's based on observable reality. What's especially important is that this conversation is finally moving beyond the question of whether AI is cool or impressive. Of course it's impressive. The real question is, who controls it, who benefits from it, and who absorbs the costs? Because under capitalism, technological advancement does not automatically translate into shared prosperity. Without organized labor, public regulation, and democratic control, productivity gains tend to flow upward into the hands of owners and investors. That's the significance of growing resistance and tech workers unionizing. Communities fighting massive AI data center expansion. Journalists and labor organizers refusing the billionaire PR campaign. Greenhouse argues that if AI is going to reshape society, then workers need protections like universal health care, wage insurance, stronger labor rights, job guarantees, shorter work weeks, and democratic oversight over how these systems are deployed. And honestly, those demands should not sound radical. If corporations are claiming AI will produce unprecedented wealth, then working people should be asking why that wealth would once again be privatized while the social costs are dumped onto everybody else. Because underneath all the futuristic branding and TED Talk optimism, this is still the same old class struggle. Only now the bosses are promising they may not need workers at all. And the deck, in plain numbers, is stark and stacked. A new report for the Economic Policy Institute found that U.S. employers spend more than $1.5 billion annually fighting unionization efforts, with hundreds of millions going to union avoidance consultants, law firms, and litigation during organizing drives. According to the report, employers spend roughly $442 million each year on union avoidance consultants alone, while companies like Amazon spent $26.6 million in 2025 on anti-union consultants. EPI senior policy analyst Margaret Poydock argued that this is millions or even billions of dollars that's not going toward workers and investing into their workplace. The report ties these expenditures to the long-term decline of union density in the U.S., which has fallen from 20.3% in 1983 to just 10% today, even as public approval of unions approaches 70%. The report describes how corporations use specialized law firms and consultants to delay elections, intimidate workers, and resist first contracts. The law firm Littler Mendelson, which has represented companies including Starbucks and Amazon, was cited for lobbying against labor-friendly legislation while advising corporations on anti-union strategies. Poydock said these law firms are exploiting loopholes and weaknesses in our federal labor law, while co-author Teak Wiggin argued that employers already hold enormous power over workers and that union-busting campaigns magnify that imbalance. The report also noted that employers are charged with violating labor law in 41.5% of union elections, and that workers wait an average of 465 days to secure a first contract. Wiggins said employers who refuse neutrality agreements are choosing to try to bend the will of workers who are seeking to exercise their rights to free association. Nonetheless, we have the broader context of reviewed labor activism in the U.S. Despite declining union membership, workers continue organizing at companies like Amazon and Starbucks, while polls show strong public support for unions and union-backed workplace protections. Labor advocates argue that aggressive anti-union spending reflects corporate fear of workers gaining greater bargaining power over wages, scheduling, safety, and automation. So those pesky employers just won't give up that easily. More than 1,700 unionized workers at a Cargill beef plant in Fort Morgan, Colorado were locked out after overwhelmingly rejecting the company's contract proposal. Workers represented by Teamsters Local 455 voted down the deal by 85%, arguing the offer failed to keep pace with inflation and ignored concerns about wages, health care, and working conditions. Teamsters Representative Dean Modiker criticized the company, saying, quote, "This is a multi-billion-dollar corporation, yet we can't get $1 an hour raise?" Writers also reported worker complaints about unsafe and degrading conditions, including claims that people are urinating in their pants because they're not allowed to go to the bathroom. Cargill defended the proposal as fair, but the dispute has become another flashpoint in the broader struggle between corporate profits and labor conditions in the meatpacking industry. And developers behind Magic the Gathering Arena are accusing Wizards of the Coast of launching an anti-union campaign after workers moved to unionize with the CWA. According to Kotaku, company leadership sent employees letters urging them to think twice before supporting the union, warning that unionization could damage the company's direct working relationship with leadership. Workers and labor advocates criticized the message as classic union-busting rhetoric, designed to spread misinformation and sow fear among our colleagues. The organizing effort grew out of anger over layoffs, return-to-office mandates, workload pressures, and concerns about AI and game development. Workers said recent decisions by WOTC and Hasbro leadership have not aligned with the values of their employees, and union supporters claim they already have the support from roughly 75% of eligible staff. Now, always, and forever to the fight back. Workers on New York's Long Island Railroad went on strike early Saturday, paralyzing the busiest commuter rail system in North America. Labor unions representing about half the system's workers announced the walkout after negotiations with the Metropolitan Transportation Authority ended Friday, May 15th without a new contract. Both sides said the fight was over wage increases and health care premiums. The union had gone into talks demanding a total raise of 16% over 4 years, saying it was needed to help workers keep up with inflation. The MTA argued that the union's initial demands would lead to fare increases. MTA Chairman John Lieber said that while the MTA had met the pay demands, it had asked for new hires to pay higher health care premiums to offset some costs. The union rejected that idea. I mean, again, health care tied to our jobs is such an unnecessary complication. It's not even remotely funny. In any case, by Monday, they had a tentative deal.
Vanessa, good morning. Well, those shuttle buses will continue running here at the Mineola LIRR station through the morning rush as Long Island Railroad service is expected to resume at noon. Now, the MTA is continuing to urge riders to work from home today if possible as crews work to fully restore Long Island Railroad service. Now, the LIRR president, Robert Freese, says full service to all branches is expected to return in time for the afternoon rush. Yesterday, ridership was lighter than anticipated on the free but limited shuttle buses the MTA provided from several Long Island locations to New York City subway stations. During the morning commute, more than 2,000 riders used the shuttle service, far below the roughly 13,000 passengers the agency had prepared for. Now, here's what the labor unions had to say about a deal being reached.
We have good news tonight. We're pleased to announce that the parties have reached an agreement. Due to the nature of the negotiations, we cannot discuss the specifics. What I can say is we are looking forward to our members getting back to work and doing what they do best.
Now, Governor Kathy Hochul says the deal will not increase fares or taxes and will give employees fair wages. Now, she also says that she is not at liberty to discuss the details of that deal as the new contract is currently being considered and voted on by union members.
And we have a growing national boycott campaign organized by the REI Union during REI's annual anniversary sale, the retailer's largest revenue event of the year. The boycott began May 15th and runs through May 25th, with workers and supporters planning storefront demonstrations and outreach efforts at stores across the country. Union organizers say the action follows years of stalled contract negotiations at unionized locations and accuse the company of bargaining in bad faith while continuing anti-union tactics. The union argues that REI's public image as a progressive outdoor cooperative conflicts with its treatment of workers. Organizers claim employees have spent years attempting to secure a first contract covering wages, staffing, and workplace protections, only to see negotiations repeatedly break down. One worker said, quote, "All we want is a fair contract," while another argued that the company's anti-union stance is deeply incompatible with the values REI claims to profess. The boycott campaign has reportedly attracted tens of thousands of pledges from workers and customers who intend to avoid shopping during the high-profile sales event. Although the company recently reported improving financial performance and narrower losses, workers say management has simultaneously pursued cost-cutting measures, including proposed benefit reductions and lower starting pay for new hires. REI, meanwhile, maintains it has bargained in good faith and argues that the boycott risks harming the co-op's financial stability and employees themselves. The dispute has become one of the most visible labor conflicts in outdoor retail, with union supporters attempting to pressure the company during its busiest sales period of the year. Here's Ashley, an organizer from North Carolina, from the Union Bug podcast.
Now, it's my understanding that this is one of, if not the largest sale that REI puts on every year in May.
Yeah, the anniversary sale every year, it's huge. It is from May 15th through May 25th. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but it makes up a lot of, our profits. We didn't take it lightly to call for a boycott. We really feel like this is our, a last resort. Like, we've tried doing this for 4 years, and we want them to know like how serious this is, and they're going to have to meet us. Like, I've said it at the table, like, your fate is tied to ours. You have to bargain with us. We're not giving up. And I feel like they pushed us here, and by not taking us seriously and kind of underestimating us. So I'm ready for us to show up and get them there.
Yeah. What has been their response? I did see one statement from REI that I would say lacked detail. Certainly made some jabs, but, has there been any conversation leading up to this, either in bargaining sessions or just from management, that you've heard about this upcoming boycott and what that might mean for them?
Yeah. I think Mary Beth Lawton released something recently in an interview with a publication in Seattle that, kind of put it on the union, and like, do they understand that we are going to affect like other workers in their outcomes? It's disappointing for them to blame the union or the workers for this outcome that we're calling for, because like I said, we've been at it for 4 years, and like they've pushed us in this corner. We want other stores to know, like, we're fighting for like the soul of the co-op. We want our co-op back. And I think even non-union stores, even people that don't believe in unions, can see where the co-op has been headed for the past 4 or 5 years. And not many people are happy about it. And we really want to reestablish those values for us. And if that's what it takes, like, come back and bargain with us. You had a chance last month. We told you we would call it off if you met us with seriousness. And the proposals they gave us last month, like, we usually show decorum at the table. We're very polite. Thank you for your proposal. We laughed out loud. It was so ridiculous. And for them to try to hold it against us when that's how they're meeting us is wild.
In other organizing updates, how about this one? According to the New York Times, a new contract agreement between New York City hotel owners and the powerful Hotel and Gaming Trades Council will raise the average pay of hotel housekeepers to more than $100,000 a year, marking one of the most significant labor victories in the city in recent years. The 8-year deal covers workers at nearly 250 hotels and includes wage increases of more than 50%. While preserving fully employer-paid health care benefits for 27,000 union members and their families. Union President Rich Marcos said, quote, "Wage increases were our primary focus in this contract cycle because the cost of living for our members has been increasing so dramatically." The agreement also averts a potential strike that could have disrupted tourism during the FIFA World Cup and America 250 celebrations. The article places the agreement within a broader wave of labor unrest across New York, noting recent strikes and contract battles involving nurses, university faculty, of course rail workers, and building employees. Hotel workers have spent more than a year preparing for a possible walkout, even launching a website warning there was a distinct possibility that there'll be strikes, pickets, and lockouts during the World Cup. Union leaders also pushed successfully for higher unemployment benefits to reduce the financial burden of striking. While hotel industry representatives praised the agreement, they warned about tremendous economic headwinds, rising taxes, and tourism losses since the pandemic. Analysts suggested hotels may attempt to offset higher labor costs by raising already record-high room prices. Still, supporters framed the contract as a major win for working-class New Yorkers. Mayor Zoran Mamdani said, quote, "This contract is a win for our hospitality industry, our economy, and for a city that works best when people who keep it running can afford to live here too." By the end of the contract in 2034, some union housekeepers could earn about $110,000 annually, with Morocco calling it, quote, "the largest wage increases and benefits in the union's history." Now, do you think for 1 second that this would have ever happened without the union? If these housekeepers were just independently employed and not organized in any way, only paid at the mercy of the hotels themselves? Enough said. Meanwhile, Wisconsin Public Radio reports that hundreds of nurses at SSM Health St. Mary's Hospital, Madison, are organizing to join SEIU, with organizers saying more than 70% of the hospital's roughly 870 registered nurses have already signed authorization cards to trigger a union election. These nurses cite the same acute issues we've seen around the country with other healthcare actions since the pandemic: chronic understaffing, burnout, low pay, and deteriorating working conditions. Nurse Savannah Nevzik said workers feel they've been losing resources within the hospital and often feel defeated at the end of the day, adding, quote, "We feel like our voices are not heard. We're not getting a say in things." Another nurse, Sable Dobby, described dangerous staffing conditions where inexperienced workers are left without support, saying, quote, "I'm the one who knows the most here, and that's so scary." The article also details accusations of anti-union retaliation by hospital management. Nurses allege the hospital threatened discipline for wearing union pins and badge reels and canceled themed attire days to prevent displays of union support. One organizer said management's actions appeared intended to make workers believe participating in a union can get you in trouble. Despite that pressure, nurses described growing solidarity around the campaign. Registered nurse Patrick Masters said, "You can take our badge reel, you can take our pin, but you can't take the fact that we're organized, we're together." SEIU Wisconsin accused the hospital of responding with extreme anti-union tactics, while the hospital said it respects employees' right to make a free and informed choice about union representation. So as we look at these individual battlegrounds, it becomes clear that these aren't just isolated corporate disputes. They're direct, burning symptoms of a much larger domestic failure. For the last several decades, our political and economic institutions haven't just ignored working people. They've actively restructured society to strip them of power. This is the hangover of a neoliberal consensus that promised free markets would lift all boats, but instead delivered aggressive union busting, a frayed social safety net, and a political class that feels entirely captured by wealthy interests. We are told to individually recession-proof our lives because our public policy has systematically outsourced security to private capital. When we see millions of Americans working harder than ever only to fall further behind, we are looking at a system functioning exactly as it was designed to, concentrating unimaginable wealth at the top while disciplining the rest of us. On a recent conference in Columbia titled The Economy for Life, organized by the Progressive International alongside the Colombian government and local think tanks, President Gustavo Petro offered a striking formulation. Today, it's no longer about class struggle between capital and labor, but about an economy that either serves life or death. A recent Jacobin essay, A Left Moral Vision Needs a Political Economy to Match, takes this claim seriously, but also uses it as a point of tension. Because if you look at the world around us, climate breakdown, rising external debt, extractivism, ecological collapse, hunger, and war, it's easy to feel the urgency of that framing. It forces a basic question. What kind of economy are we living under? Who does it serve? And who is it leaving behind? But urgency alone doesn't produce a program. And this is where a recurring problem in contemporary progressive politics appears: the substitution of political economy with moral language. The idea that if we all agree on the values, life, dignity, sustainability, peace, then the economic design will somehow follow. The risk is that the analysis becomes too thin to govern anything. Because an economy for life may sound self-evident, even incontestable, but unless it's anchored in how power actually operates, who controls investment, how labor markets are structured, how global capital moves, how states are constrained, it remains a slogan without a map. Neoliberalism, after all, was never just an abstract hostility to life. It was a very concrete restructuring of power. It weakened unions, disciplined the global south through debt and trade regimes, narrowed the policy space of states, and reorganized global production around one central priority: capital accumulation. So if the alternative is to be real, it cannot simply be framed as life versus death. It has to be an economy reorganized around labor, around the people who actually produce social wealth, and whose bargaining power was deliberately eroded over decades. That distinction matters because well-being is not a spiritual category. It's material, wages, housing, healthcare, stability, and time. And in most societies, the majority who depend on those conditions are workers. Yet neoliberal ideologies systematically try to erase that category from political life, replacing workers with consumers and entrepreneurs, as if everyone is simply a potential market actor making free choices in a neutral system. A serious political economy has to reject that illusion. The central subject is not the sovereign consumer or the heroic entrepreneur. It's the worker, navigating an unequal labor market shaped by employer power, debt dependence, and increasingly fragile public infrastructure. There's also a tendency in some debates to assume neoliberalism is already collapsing, especially after 2008. But the record suggests something different. It did not collapse, it adapted. Labor remains disciplined, unions remain weak in many contexts, wage growth remains uneven, inequality remains structurally high, and key constraints on policy still persist even when governments change. In that sense, neoliberalism is not simply failing. It is largely doing what it was designed to do. Rising inequality, ecological degradation, and democratic erosion are not external side effects. They are compatible with a system structured around profitability and capital mobility. This also reframes comparisons with the 1970s. That earlier crisis emerged from a very different configuration. Strong labor movements in advanced economies, OPEC's capacity to shape energy prices, and a U.S. that was still structurally dependent on energy imports. Today, labor is weaker, energy geopolitics has shifted, and the U.S. has even become a major energy exporter. We are not witnessing the same breakdown of a Keynesian order, but rather stress within a global capitalism that already succeeded in restructuring labor and production. Within that structure, China plays a decisive role. Its rise cannot be treated as a side story. It became the world's central manufacturing hub, enabled in part by U.S.-led integration into global markets, from opening in the 1970s to WTO accession in the early 2000s. But the more important shift is not historical entry. It is structural transformation. China is no longer just a low-cost assembler. It is now a direct competitor in high-value sectors like electric vehicles, batteries, and green technology. That creates a world where production is partially rebalanced, but not fully rehierarchized. Because here's the contradiction. Even as production shifts, financial and military power remains heavily anchored in the U.S. The dollar system remains dominant. Global liquidity, reserve accumulation, and much of international financial discipline still run through U.S.-centered institutions. So what we're seeing is not a clean transition of hegemony, but a fragmented reconfiguration, production shifting faster than finance and security. This matters especially for the global South, and particularly Latin America, which sits in a structurally divided position. Trade increasingly links it to China, often through commodity exports and manufactured imports, but finance and monetary dependence remain tied to the dollar system and U.S.-centered constraints. The result is a kind of dual dependency, new markets without full autonomy. And this is where simplistic narratives about a unified global South break down. China, Brazil, Mexico, India, Colombia, and South Africa occupy fundamentally different positions in the global economy. Closer ties with China alone do not automatically translate into industrial development or technological upgrading. China is a strategic actor pursuing its own national development path, not a development agency for others. That means development strategy has to be constructed internally. Historically, when development has succeeded, it has rarely followed orthodox prescriptions of austerity, full liberalization, and rigid inflation targeting. More effective strategies have included managing external vulnerability, using public banking, building industrial policy capacity, maintaining some exchange rate stability, rising wages, and strengthening social transfers. During parts of Latin America's so-called pink tide period, under relatively favorable global conditions, governments experimented with elements of this approach: reserve accumulation, reduced foreign currency debt exposure, targeted industrial policy, public investment, and wage expansion. These were not perfect models, but they illustrate something important: policy space matters. And that brings us to the central battleground today: fiscal policy. Not interest rate debates, not technocratic adjustments, but the political limits imposed by fiscal rules and austerity regimes. These frameworks are often presented as neutral or responsible, but in practice they constrain democratic government's ability to use public spending as a tool of transformation. Because fiscal policy is not just crisis management, it's a mechanism for shaping the economy itself, building infrastructure, sustaining employment, supporting domestic supply chains, and directing investment into sectors that private capital will not prioritize. This is especially critical because monetary policy in the periphery is structurally constrained by global financial hierarchy. When the U.S. raises interest rates, other countries often must follow to prevent capital flight and currency instability. That external constraint makes fiscal capacity even more important. And yet the idea that markets alone will deliver ecological transition or industrial transformation persists in parts of liberal environmentalism. But large-scale transitions, especially green transitions, do not happen spontaneously. They require coordination, planning, and public investment, capable of steering capital, rather than merely hoping it will align with social goals. Ultimately, policy autonomy is not an abstract ideal. It matters only insofar as it changes material conditions, wages, employment, security, public service, and bargaining power. A state that guarantees full employment and stronger labor conditions does more than improve welfare. It shifts power relations in society itself. But none of this is automatic or purely top-down. State capacity can open space, but durable transformation depends on organized social forces capable of defending those gains. Without that, reforms tend to reverse under pressure. So when Petro speaks of an economy for life, the useful part of that framing is the ethical urgency. But the danger is mistaking that urgency for a program. Because the real question is not whether we prefer life over death. It's how global capitalism actually produces inequality, how neoliberal institutions enforce constraints, how labor power was weakened, and how those structures can be changed. The task is not to choose between moral vision and political economy. It's to connect them. Without grounding in material power, production, and global hierarchy, the language of life becomes inspirational, but it does not yet become governance. And that's all for this episode. Thanks for watching, and to my audio people, thanks for listening. Please like and share so I can get this message out to more of our brothers and sisters. And hit that subscribe button. I'll see you next week. Solidarity always.